WashingTECH.
Hey, it's Joe, and I don't have to tell you, relationships are critical in Washington. But how do you, A, find out who the key players are, and B, figure out how to reach out to them? Well, I want to tell you about Leadership Connect. It's been an absolute lifesaver for us as we expand our operations and outreach here at WashingTECH. Leadership Connect, it's the digital service used by top federal contractors and government affairs leaders to contact decision makers and develop those strategic relationships. Visit leadershipconnect.io and join the community. I love it, and I'm 100% sure you will too. That's leadershipconnect.io. Try it now.
How is it that this man still has access to the platform?
Welcome to the WashingTECH Tech Policy Podcast.
From Washington, D.C., it's the WashingTECH Tech Policy Podcast.
With Joe Miller.
Joe Miller.
They're still counting the votes. Even in the face of several lawsuits President Trump has brought to challenge the election results, Biden's win is only becoming more decisive. The president-elect is on track to win by over 5 million popular votes, bringing his total to more than 80 million, more than any presidential candidate in history. And he still has another 75, at least likely, electoral votes outstanding in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, and Arizona. So we're pretty much done here. Hit me up, 866-482-3898. Leave your thoughts. Maybe we'll use them in a future episode. 866-482-3898. What tech policy issues should the Biden administration and Congress focus on? Let us know, 866-482-3898. Save it to your contacts so, I don't have to say the number over and over again like a ShamWow commercial. So what's the next 4 years going to look like in terms of tech policy? Obviously, China will be a major issue, and particularly Huawei. It'll be interesting to see whether the Biden administration continues its ban of U.S. companies doing any business with Huawei whatsoever. Key allies haven't supported the Trump administration's ban, citing their reliance on Huawei technology and a lack of alternative suppliers. What are the chances of war with China over the coming years, as China has continued to object to the U.S. presence in the South China Sea? War would certainly have a major impact on the supply chain, so that's definitely something to watch out for. Section 230, Communications Decency Act, which states, for those who don't know, it says that platforms aren't legally responsible for the content their users post. It's been an issue. The Trump administration attempting to get the FCC, an agency that's supposed to be independent, no less, to use Section 230 to rein in what some conservatives see as an anti-conservative bias on platforms like Twitter. I'd be very surprised to see the Biden administration continue down that path. It's just a huge waste of administrative, legislative, and judicial resources for a policy that I believe would ultimately lose on First Amendment grounds once it hit the Supreme Court. If they even heard it. Republicans and some Democrats would certainly pursue reforming Section 230. But we'll have to see if Josh Hawley is as passionate about illegal sexual content and sex trafficking as he says he is, and pursues Section 230 as vigorously as he has up until now. And another issue, I think, and just to put a pin in this, because it's something we haven't heard a lot about, and probably should, since we saw a growth among Latino and Black working class voters voting for Trumpism, is the future of work. What does the future of work look like for Americans in a tech sector that hasn't really done anything meaningful other than releasing diversity reports to improve diversity and inclusion? Nothing observable, I should say, because we can't see everything that's going on. All we see are the numbers, which are pretty sad. If you look at them, they don't look anything like the U.S. population. And if you have companies like IBM already lobbying the Biden administration to fill the government skills gap by working with these same companies, what will we have then? We have the same companies hiring from the same 5 schools, and we'll just continue on that path. And so then what's that going to look like at the next election if we don't provide those opportunities? We have over 5,000 colleges in the U.S., many of which offer amazing programs. They're accredited, right? They have amazing programs, but don't have the endowments. They don't have the marketing budgets for various historical reasons we won't get into. We hear a lot about recruiting from HBCUs, and that's great. But we have many, many state and local colleges with incredible diversity, minority-serving institutions with Black, Latino, Middle Eastern, Asian, Native American students. And these schools don't get much advocacy at all. They're severely underrepresented in the tech sector, in government. Why is that? So those are just 3 areas I'm certainly going to be looking at. Let's get into Section 230. David Johns, Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition. He's an enthusiast about equity, leveraging his time, talent, and treasures to address the needs of individuals and communities often neglected and ignored. And he used to work for President Obama as well. David Johns. It's been a long time. I mean, you're a big star.
Not a star, just busy trying to do the work.
You can't see David because we're not doing video yet for these podcasts, but see, that's the cut I wanted to get. I went to the barber yesterday and he did it wrong. He made it more military. And anyway.
You might have to break it with your barber. I'm happy to introduce you to mine.
Yeah, I've been with my barber for over 10 years too. But you see, I grew this fro over COVID, and now I want to do something else.
Yeah, listen, COVID is changing up everything in people's lives, including their relationships with their cosmetologists.
Yeah, and including Section 230.
That too.
I wanted to bring you on because you wrote this really interesting article in Morning Consult talking about Section 230 ahead of the hearing where policymakers were grilling Twitter, Facebook, and Google about Section 230. And of course, you have the conservatives really worried about this so-called anti-conservative bias on social media. And of course, the president has gotten the FCC to look into how it can use Section 230 to govern speech. So I just wanted to bring you on and give folks kind of an overview of the article. And if they want, we'll link to it in the show notes so they can read it themselves. But I'd love to hear your take on this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. For folks that don't know, but thanks for the invitation, Joe, I lead the National Black Justice Coalition, and we are a civil rights organization at the intersections of racial equity and LGBTQIA plus equality. What that means is that we are mindful of the reality that so many Americans know what it means to hold intersectionality in their being. Intersectionality is a term that so many people are using now, and so many of those people have no understanding of what it means. And so what was important in publishing the article to me was highlighting that the threat of changes to Section 230 have already made the work of advancing intersectional social justice more complicated. We have experienced platforms, including the ones that you've mentioned, change their processes for approving ads, for flagging tweets, and otherwise moderating the ways in which civil rights organizations are able to do their work in anticipation of what might be legislative changes. He who shall not be named tweeted about Twitter and talked about Section 230. And my response to this was, how is it that this man still has access to the platform? In part because I know civil rights leaders who have been banned from Twitter for doing the work of organizing and advancing social justice messages and issues and causes. And I think that often conversations about 230 in particular are hella wonky. And people miss that Black, queer, trans, and non-binary folks use digital spaces and platforms to organize, to communicate, to ensure safety. And all that right now is at risk because of the threat to potential changes. And I just want somebody to tell me why there's a need to do this when we got all of these policy priorities that exist in this moment. Why is it that there is this focus on Section 230, again, given the complications that it is manifesting in our work and our lives?
Yeah, it's really a distraction. And I'm looking at Donald Trump's post, Twitter is out of control, made possible through the government gift of Section 230.
And he said that on Twitter.
Unbelievable.
And I think, again, like how different it would be in terms of people not having to deal with misinformation or process the distractions if it were not an option for him. And I understand the importance of finding the balance, a word that I hate, but I use when necessary, between freedom of speech and ensuring people's safety, like the ability to not have to deal with like hate crimes or the things associated with it, including hate speech.
Yeah, and you never hear him say anything about that.
No, you never hear anything about that part of it, just like you never hear about how the threat to changes are impacting the lives of those of us who are on the front lines and in the gaps.
And just like you don't hear anything from the Department of Justice, the current Department of Justice, about domestic terrorism.
Listen, who even leads the current Department of Justice is my question. Is it Lil Pump? Is that the little boy's name? Is that what was going on recently?
Yeah, the guy with the Coke bottles.
Oh, Jesus, help us.
What about sex trafficking? So, I'm looking at this now, but Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, and the role that it might play in sex trafficking, including consensual sex work on different platforms. Now, what kinds of proposals have you heard around balancing the need to, deal with legal versus illegal sexual content online?
So first, let me say that we need to be spending as much energy talking about the work required to legalize sex work and to decriminalize it as we are spending talking about Section 230. That having been said, I have not heard nor read thoughtful proposals that respond to the question that you articulated. What I do know is that Black, trans sex workers who, again, engage in sex work for a variety of reasons that should not be judged by folks who don't understand the experience of Black trans folks and or people who engage in sex works or the sex work or the confluence of the two. But suffice to say that there should be more energy paid to figuring out ways to ensure that platforms are able to be used by people who engage in sex work in ways that help to ensure their safety, which is something that I know has been important to folks that engage in sex work who are members of our community because they're Black, queer, trans, and non-binary, and preventing folks who are not engaged in sex work from being trafficked or otherwise victims.
You mentioned hate speech briefly. What about regulating hate speech would be different than regulating so-called conservative bias?
So I think there are a couple of things that are challenging with regard to enforcement. One is establishing a threshold around what is and what isn't in violation of whatever the policies are for each platform. And we would hope that there would be some uniformity between them. But given the lack of regulation in the industry at present, we can only hope for that. So that's the first piece of it. The second is in the process by which each platform would go through the process of mediating or moderating content and whether or not they're using AI and or algorithms to do it and or a combination of actual people to do it. And then for me, the question becomes who is creating the algorithms and or who are those people, because their understanding of language, or more specifically what Black feminists refer to as the matrix of domination, the signs, systems, and symbols that are used to uphold white supremacy and the privileges that people who uphold it and enjoy it and benefit from it rely upon. Period, not period, semicolon. With regard to conservative bias, the hardest part about this is that it is a concept. There are no parameters around what defines it, what's in bounds, what's out of bounds, and it is often a reflection of context and a particular sentiment at a particular moment in time, right? And we should all be clear that there are concerted efforts to hide behind religious and conservative bias to discriminate, to persecute, to oppress, to deny people access to the same democratic institutions and rights and privileges that people take up arms in defense for. Right. There was a case tried before the Supreme Court of the United States, a Fulton case that is a thinly veiled attempt to hide behind religion to be able to discriminate against people based on sexual identity, gender orientation, or expression. And that's wrong. And what I know as a descendant of enslaved Africans is that language is one of the things that is used to help societies and communities make sense of things. And in that regard, it is often for those who don't have the ability to dictate what certain words mean, it's used as a tool to oppress them. And so in the same way that he who shall not be named, but the current occupant of the Oval Office is able to send tweets that are that incite violence, that have been associated with increases in hate crimes along the basis of race, as well as sexual identity, gender orientation, or expression, and do it without impunity because he can hide behind not having violated what has been determined by courts to be hate speech is beyond problematic.
David Johns, Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, brother. Thank you for all you do.
And that concludes episode 248. Thanks for joining me. Remember, 866-482-3898. Leave a message, comment on what you've heard. Let us know what you'd like to hear. Maybe we'll use it on a future episode. Again, that's 866-482-3898. And of course, if you like what we do here, leave a rating and review. We'd love to hear from you. Leave it wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps others know what they can expect from the show and really helps us out. It's raining here in DC. We need it. It was getting hot up in here. So now that the election's over, I hope you'll spend some time on self-care. I personally have discovered the joys of Mario Kart. Have you played it? Yes, gaming is self-care. Stay healthy and focused.
WashingTECH.